ever since, we've been leaning into that joy concept, and we've integrated into our practice. And ever since doing so, we've seen a lot of success, not only with the podcast, but also on the wealth management side. Because at the end of the day, the things we're talking about, whether it's money or financial situation, at the end of the day, people want to use that as a tool to drive joy in their lives.
Welcome back to the Pod Junction podcast, the show where business leaders share how they use podcasting to grow, connect, and build their brands. Today, I'm speaking to Larry Sprung. Larry is founder of Mitlin Financial, host of the Mitlin Money Mindset podcast, and author of the book Financial Planning Made Personal. Lawrence is someone who truly understands how to build trust and long-term relationships, both in business and through his podcast. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sadaf. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Larry, first of all, tell us a bit about your business and then how the Mitlin Money Mindset podcast fits into that.
Sure. So we're in a traditional wealth management firm, but we talk a lot about joy, which is how the Mitlin Money Mindset podcast came about, because our podcast is really there to help you find more joy, success, and purpose through inspiring stories. And we try to give as many actionable insights from our fascinating guests as we can, so that our listeners can create a life that truly brings them joy. Ultimately, that's the impetus and idea behind our business with wealth management surrounds joy. And then we tie in the podcast as a supporting role to that business.
That's really interesting, because when I think of financial growth, I don't usually think of the word joy. I think of success, but I don't think of the word joy. So tell me how you landed on that.
So it was a little bit by accident, and I talk about it pretty often when we were thinking about launching the podcast, the Mitlin Money Mindset. My wife, who happens to be our director of marketing, came to me and said, you really need to have a single question that you ask each of your guests to kind of tie in each episode. And I was like, well, okay, great. Well, think up a question, because that's not my wheelhouse. I'm not the creative. That's what she does. And a few days later, she came back to me and she says, I got it. She goes, you're going to ask everybody, what did you do today that brought you joy? And ever since, we've been leaning into that joy concept, and we've integrated into our practice. And ever since doing so, we've seen a lot of success, not only with the podcast, but also on the wealth management side. Because at the end of the day, the things we're talking about, whether it's money or financial situation, at the end of the day, the result is people want to use that as a tool to create more joy in their lives, whether that be some form of retirement down the line, watching their child or grandchild, graduate debt free, or whether it's a vacation home. It's really ultimately a tool to drive joy in their lives.
That's very cool. I really like that, because it almost gives people permission to feel like, what I'm trying to do here is a good thing for me, for my family.
Well, it also makes us, puts us in a position where we separate ourselves from all the other advisors out there who are solely concentrated on the numbers and the financial aspect of things. And certainly those are things you have to be concerned with, but those are table stakes. Any advisor, worth their weight in salt should be able to work with those numbers and figure out a game plan. What we really want to spend the lion's share of our time with the families we work with is on what joy looks like for them. What does it mean to them? What does that joyful event and lifestyle down the road look like to them? So we can then talk about how the numbers will support that, or what we need to do to get there and get those numbers to support that life of joy that they're framing out.
That's really great. That's great. So with your podcast then, do you focus on the joy aspect of it, of their journey, or whatever it is that you're talking to your guest about? How does that part play out?
Yeah, I mean, some of the guests that we have lend to that conversation, and they're very joy filled, right? But at the end of the day, we do also have some more serious topics and some more serious guests on that. We may not spend a lot of time on the joy factor, but in any event, at some point in the conversation, because our last question is going to be, what did you do today that brought you joy? and put you in the right mindset for success. So we try to infiltrate the joy, terminology and kind of that theme throughout the show. But at the end of the day, if there's not really a true opportunity to do that, then we'll do that through the question. But at the end of the day, most people hearing these people's journey will bring them joy and creating actionable steps that they could take in their own lives.
Great. And about your podcast, did you start that after you started your business, or did they go hand in hand?
No, the podcast started well after we started the business. Mitlin Financial has been around since 2004. So we were about 16 years into the business when we launched the podcast at the end of 2020. We launched it about 6 months after the COVID pandemic started. It was something that we had in the plans for about a year and a half prior. And we decided to continue forward and launch it regardless of the environment we're in.
Fantastic. And how does your podcast help your business grow?
Yeah, so that's a question we get very often, right? And I think, again, there's a lot of focus by people who are thinking about or have or are in the process of launching a podcast, right? Their immediate default is to go to the return on investment, right? What is going to be my return on investment? What's going to be the financial return that I'm going to get from investing my time, my money, and my team into this process? And that was something that we never focused on. We weren't really interested or looking for a financial return on our investment. There are some key and distinct ways that we have benefited from the podcast that I think for us at least is far more important than the monetary aspect. One is I've gotten the opportunity to speak with, meet with, spend time with people that would ordinarily not have spent time with me. They wouldn't have taken a phone call. They may not have, I may never have crossed paths with them, but I did have the opportunity to have them on my show as a guest and spend some time with them, learn from them, and share those learnings with our audience and our listeners, which is invaluable. The second thing is we've now created a curated library over the last 4+ years of guests that can and do come in handy with regard to supporting the families we serve. So, for example, there was a gentleman I met with last week who's a family we work with, and he's considering shifting jobs. And, he realized that he hasn't been active on LinkedIn, for example, in recent years while he was working with his current employer. And when he was talking to a couple of friends of his who've just found new employment, they realized, they shared with him that they found their employment through LinkedIn. So he was sharing this with me and he said, I got to get more active. I got to update my profile, etc. So we recently had a guest who's a LinkedIn expert that talks about, what you should be looking to do with regard to your profile, how to set it up, how to position yourself for the next, your next role, etc. So I immediately sent a link to this family we were talking about and said, hey, I was thinking about you this weekend, and I thought this episode would really come in handy based upon the conversation that we had. So it's become this library that when people have challenges or, issues within their lives that they're trying to solve, it doesn't just have to be me answering those questions. I can share, meaningful stories and meaningful ideas from guests that we've spent some time with. And it's created this curated library, which is, has been a huge return on investment, maybe not a monetary one, but, those two are probably the biggest two. And then we have had the opportunity where several guests have become clients of the firm or referred families into us. Not necessarily something we were thinking about or looking for, but it was a nice surprise after spending some time with them and learning a little bit about them and them learning about us. They felt comfortable enough to, entrust us either with themselves or somebody they knew. So, we don't look at it from a monetary. I think those three ways and way number one and two in terms of meeting people and having this curated library are the two biggest components of why we continue to do the podcast today.
Fantastic. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is so much unique value in podcasting and way beyond the numbers, as you've said. Listening to you talk, I think your curated library of guests, as you said, I think also helps build trust with both your current and future clients as well, because you've got that rapport with them and you're able to help them out with different problems that they might be facing or different issues that they're trying to work through.
Absolutely. And sometimes, I may talk to them about it 2 or 3 times and we get no movement, or, it doesn't resonate, but maybe hearing a third party voice might, resonate more with them, because now it's not just Larry sharing this, it's Larry and so, who is also an expert in this field. So it just helps reinforce what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it for the families we serve each and every day.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. What are some of the challenges that you faced with your podcast?
Well, I think you have to know what you want to be and what you don't want to be. Initially, I thought I was going to have a show that was not going to be interview style, and I was going to go on and talk for a period of time about a given topic. And in a very short period of time, I realized that was not something I wanted to do. I just didn't enjoy just speaking to the camera and through a mic. It wasn't engaging enough for me. So we shifted and pivoted to an interview style show, which is right in my wheelhouse. I really enjoy talking with others, sharing their stories, and sharing actionable ideas for our listeners that they can implement and utilize the stories and those insights, so they can create a life of joy for themselves. So, those were things. And I think early on, creating a process that was going to be duplicatable, where it did not necessarily include me touching every facet of the process. So as it stands right now, I do, probably, an hour and 10 minutes worth of work per episode, which basically includes, reviewing the questions, reviewing things about the guest, reviewing or creating an introduction and a thank you for them, and then just recording the episode, the booking, the editing, the posting, the blog, etc., all those other things outside of creating the intro, the thank you, and actually the interview or the time on the episode with the guest. Everything else is handled by my team. So I think those are challenges you have to figure out early on and how you want to handle them. I think that, podcasting can be, it is very rewarding, but it can be a very time consuming thing. And you have to, take a look at what is your time worth, and is it worth you actually doing the editing when you may not be an editing expert, or, hiring somebody. I'm a big proponent of Dan Sullivan and Who Not How. Finding people who can do it and not learning how to do it. Okay. So I'm a big proponent of his for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, teams are great. Did you always have help around you with this editing side of things and all the other parts that play into a podcast episode, or did that come later for you?
Yeah, so we never edited our own shows. We had components. We've added more components to it now. So I have somebody scheduling, somebody making, creating the questions based upon their background and other appearances, et cetera. So in many cases, and I adjust those and amend those based upon my knowledge and what I find out about the guests. But it's been a bit of an iterative process. I probably did more early on just because I wanted to learn what the process was, what it entailed. And as time has gone on, I've released more and more. But the editing component is something I was never involved with because it wasn't something that was in my wheelhouse that I even had the time or the bandwidth to learn. So that piece has always been outsourced. And then we've, brought the team in to handle more and more of the process as time goes on or has gone on since we've learned what we need and where it's best suited.
What was the unexpected learning curve of being a podcast host?
Oh, I don't think for me, again, I don't know what everybody who's listening to this and as they're thinking about launching or going down this venture, what their, experiences have been like. But I didn't think that, for me, it was an easy lift. It was something I was very comfortable with. I talk to people every day. I've been in the media. So it's something I'm very comfortable with. So I would say the one thing that I do know has changed over time is, my style and learning from each of the episodes and getting better as time goes on. I thought I was pretty good when I started. And, one of the things I share is we had the same guests for my first episode as I did for my 100th episode.
Oh, wow.
And as I prepared for the 100th episode, I listened back, of course, to the first episode. And boy, was the introduction that I gave for this person who's, a very important person who wrote the foreword to my book. And, I listened to that intro and I was like, man, that was terrible. So actually in the introduction for the 100th episode, when we had him on again, I made a mention and I kind of made a joke that I was going to do him right this time because the first one wasn't that great. But I think that's the approach you have to take if you're going to be a podcaster, right? You're not going to be the best podcaster you're ever going to be on episode 1. And you're still not going to be the best podcaster you're ever going to be on episode 100. If you're doing it right, it should be something that you're getting better with, each and every episode over time. And, if you listen from one year to the next, they should sound better. They should, you should have a better sounding quality and output. So if you're learning, if you're just going to do the same thing every time, then you're probably not going to see that difference. But we want to improve. So, we make a concerted effort to improve with each and every episode that we record.
Yeah. I think with something like this, when you are regularly podcasting, you start learning and growing without even realizing it. It's when you look back that you realize just the distance you've come.
Right. Yeah. Listen, if you want to do it right and you want to improve, which hopefully you're doing it to improve, then you should be listening. I listen to other podcasts, incessantly to learn different things as well. So I pick those up and listen to really good interviewers because I'm doing an interview show. So I listen to really good interviewers to learn from them also how to get the guest who may not be opening up to open up and things like that, or go down, find an area that, the listeners would be very interested in and dive a little bit deeper. So it's a learning process. And if you're doing it right, they're only going to get better with each episode that you record.
Mm-hmm. Larry, what have you learned about audience engagement?
Oh, that's an interesting thing. I think probably my biggest takeaway there is there's not as much engagement as you think, meaning that, and you don't have to be concerned about that as well, I should add, right? And what I mean by that is we have a lot of folks that have come to us to work with us. They want to hire us as their advisor. And in many instances, they've never commented on a post. They've never commented on a podcast episode, but they've listened kind of quietly, behind the scenes. And when they're ready to make that move, they make the move. So I don't get too concerned about the numbers, the downloads and things like that, because there are a lot of people out there that are not necessarily interacting with your brand, but they know you're there. They're watching you. And when their time is right, they're going to come forward and work with you. We have an advisory council, which is like a board of directors for the firm. And we met last week and somebody mentioned to me, or we were talking about why they became a family that we work with, or why they inquired with us. And they said, I was watching you for about 5 to 10 years. And I watched you and your family, and I watched your boys grow up, and I watched what they've turned into. And I was like, wow, if him and his wife can raise great kids like this, I can only imagine how he would be able to help me with my financial situation. So when I had an issue or challenge, I reached out to you. And they really, I don't recall them commenting or any kind of outreach, that to my knowledge. And, I think you have to be aware that could be very well happening. Just because you're not getting the downloads, the comments, et cetera, doesn't mean you're not getting the eyeballs or the ears to be listening or watching what you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's that consistency and content quality over time, isn't it, that brings those people to you. But I think there's also something else you've touched on about making it relatable as well. So they've seen your family, they know about your family. whether it's in, a blog you've written or whether you've talked about them on the podcast, but it's that ability to relate to you. And so they're drawn into that because whatever it is about you, they can relate to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're not selling, we're not in the business of selling widgets where we sell somebody something and then they go away. We're in the relationship business. We build long-standing relationships with families, and in many cases today we have relationships with second and third generations of those families. So you have to be authentic, you have to be relatable, and in many cases, those people that don't reach out to us probably aren't because they don't align with our values, and people know, and the families we work with know my family comes first. So if something happens within my family, I may have to cancel a meeting to do that, whatever that is, right? And my family really includes my my immediate family, my kids, my wife, but the folks that work here, my stakeholders, they're part of our family. Our clients are part of our family as well. But by being relatable and putting it out there, people have an understanding of who you are, what you're about, what your values are. And, they make a decision if that's something that they're aligned with or not by exercising whether or not they're going to call or reach out and see if there's an opportunity to work together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you talk about relationships. Podcasting is great for that. And you've given us some examples of how exactly that plays out. Larry, what's next for Mitlin Money Mindset?
Yeah, we're just continuing to spread as much joy as we can. We're always looking for, I think if you look at our guests have gotten better. They've gotten higher level. We're always trying to get better, whether that's me as the host, whether that's getting more relatable guests with real interesting stories, fascinating guests. And really just looking to align with people who can help our listeners create a life that truly brings them joy. And, that's what's next, is to just, double down on what we know is working and continue that and just refine it. I think we have a pretty good recipe, and now it's just a matter of refining it to a degree and increasing the content and the quality of the show.
That's great. I love how Mitlin Money Mindset ties into the broader mission of the business. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if it wasn't for the business, we probably wouldn't have a podcast, right? But so the business is there first and foremost, and is more important when all's said and done than the podcast. But really the podcast for me is really an act of joy for myself. I really enjoy hosting it and having the guests on and spending that time with people. And, our listeners align with it too. And we try to make it very relatable for them so they have actionable takeaways that they can implement in their own lives to also create a more joyful life for themselves.
Fantastic, Larry. I think that's quite clear in listening to you speak, that you enjoy having those conversations, building those relationships, and learning and improving as you go. You seem to be drawn to that.
I am, and I appreciate you giving me this platform to share my story and our success with your audience. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Larry, what advice would you give to other professionals who are wondering whether a podcast is worth the investment?
I say just do it. I mean, just don't do it haphazardly. Make sure you have a game plan. But just like every plan that you have in life, it's got to be flexible, right? Don't try to iron out every detail. Just have a rough framework as far as, what the goal is of the podcast, what the format is. Have those high level things that you're thinking about, have them framed out, and then start going into it. And you might get surprised. I mean, before I even recorded an official episode, I realized I did not want to have a solo gig on the podcast, and I canned it right away. So that flexibility was, enormous. So, just because you go into it one way doesn't mean you can't adjust. Be flexible with it. And, the first year really should be a year of, experimentation in terms of figuring out what your comfort level is, how you feel most comfortable, how are you making your guests most comfortable, creating that process. Just do it. And then you'll see, don't go in with any expectations about downloads or what that return on investment would or could or should be, and start, noticing and seeing what happens to your business, because it may not be reflected in downloads. It may just be reflected in inquiries. Maybe your inquiry level goes up, and maybe it's directly tied to the podcast, maybe not. But either way, it's definitely helping because people are looking for that. So, put a plan together, be flexible, and then start measuring, things over the course of the year and refine it and get a process in place that can allow you to continue it going forward.
I love that. That is fantastic advice. Just get on with it.
There you go. Done is better than perfect.
Yes, that's right. Larry, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me today.
No problem. But before we wrap up, Larry, where can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, so the easiest and the best place is on LinkedIn. Lawrence Sprung is the name. You can find me there. Be happy to connect with anybody that is interested. And then if you go to mitlinmoneymindset.com, we have our podcast site there, which gets you links to everything we're up to, whether it be the podcast, the book, or our Joy Journal. All of our deliverables are right there and accessible to you.
Awesome. Thank you. So to those tuning in, you will find all the links in the show description. And if you're listening and are curious about using podcasting as a strategic tool for your own business growth, I hope this episode has inspired you to build credibility, trust, and connection with your audience. As always, thanks for listening. Bye from Larry and from me, and I'll see you next time.